Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 128 of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi. Tim Moore not with us for this episode. We did have him on Monday, so if you missed that one, we talked about NFL free agency, franchise tagging. You can check that out on Spotify or YouTube, wherever you enjoy Sports Speak. Next week, we'll have another episode. There's a lot of NFL news that we're going to have to cover. I will just briefly touch on one before we get to our guest, Aaron Rodgers, saying on the Pat McAfee show today that he intends to play for the Jets. I don't think any of this is really news per se. I know him saying it is a first, but to be honest, I think we all knew this is where he wanted to play, given that he sent them that wish list of who to get. So now the question is, will the Jets actually abide by that and try to sign people besides Allen Lazard? And what compensation will the Packers want? Because if Aaron Rodgers wants to go to the Jets, he will have to be traded there. But we'll save the NFL talk for next week and our MLB preview in about a week and a half as well. But March Madness in the fold. I'm joined now by one of my colleagues from WRSU at Rutgers. Sadly, Rutgers is not part of that. Sadly, Rutgers isn't even part of the NIT anymore because they lost in the first round to Hofstra. But maybe that's better. Then our minds won't be clouded at all focused on Rutgers. We can focus on the other 64 teams. Alec Crouthamel, thanks for joining us here to dive into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk some basketball. Sad that my team is out, but plenty of basketball left to be played.
Yeah, for sure. Tough ending for Rutgers indeed, but a lot of other Big Ten teams in the mix and a fun bracket. Already an exciting first night in the first four. We saw the 16 seed battle get close, and then Mississippi State and Pitt coming down to the very end. The Bulldogs had multiple chances at the end, including a wide open three that they could not convert. And Pitt, as the 11 seed, get to move on to face a potentially vulnerable 6 seed in Iowa State. But let's look at the bracket as a whole, and we're going to go region by region, and we'll start with Alabama's region first. So the Crimson Tide, of course, many distractions off the court this year with Darius Miles, Brandon Miller. Brandon Miller now has a security guard armed with him at all times while he's at March Madness, which is just wild. But despite everything going on there, Nate Oates has that team in position to be a favorite probably in the tournament. And looking at the rest of this region, you've got a couple of potential upsets. San Diego State and Charleston is a 5-12 game that people are going to watch. And again, as Rutgers fans, we saw how the runner-up to Charleston in the CAA during the regular season and a team that didn't even make it to the conference championship in Hofstra played. So thinking Charleston with 30 wins could be pretty competitive. And then Virginia and Furman, which is a game a lot of people are looking at to potentially be an upset. So we'll start with that segment of the bracket first. That's a 5-12 and a 4-13 game that people are looking at. I have both of those down as upsets on my main bracket. I've got Charleston taking down San Diego State despite their defense. And I think Virginia, based on past history, can be very vulnerable in the early rounds. ACC didn't have a great year, so I got Furman as well. So what are you looking at that top portion of the bracket?
Yeah, I think in terms of the two upsets, I think I'm going to take San Diego State to win it over Charleston because that team is so defensively stout. And I think that, San Diego State's still a strong team. And Charleston has had an excellent year so far, but I think I still have San Diego State taking that. Now, on the other hand, I do think Furman's going to pull the upset. Virginia's defensive style is to pack in the paint and, maybe let those threes fly, which is something that Furman's really good at. So I think they can pull that upset. And also, on the injury front, Virginia did lose Ben Vanderplas for the season with a broken hand, and he's one of their scoring threats for a team that already struggles to put the ball in the basket. Last time we saw them in the ACC championship game, I mean, it was not pretty on the offensive end. So I think they can pull that upset in the 4-13 round.
Yeah, I'm really looking towards that one. Furman definitely has revenge in their minds from previous seasons. They want to pull off that first round upset. Moving down in that region, you have NC State there as an 11 seed, which I think is absurd that they didn't even end up in Dayton because they only had the reason they ended up making the field is because they didn't really have any bad losses, but they didn't play that well against good teams, which is the tournament field. They just had few blemishes on their resume, which put them ahead of other teams. And forget Rutgers for a second, just from an ACC standpoint, I don't know how NC State jumps Pitt, and I really don't understand how they make the field outright and Clemson ends up in the NIT when Clemson had a great year, started the season off as the top team in the ACC and had the third best record in the conference. But I'll digress on that. They face off with Creighton. Baylor plays UC Santa Barbara. A lot of people have been really high on this 14 seed against a third seeded Baylor for a potential upset. You have Missouri, who had a really solid year, maybe their best season since the Phil Pressey era, taking on Utah State. And then you got Arizona as a 2 seed against Princeton. Do you think UC Santa Barbara has any chance to pull off an upset against Baylor, or is this segment of the bracket kind of going to be straightforward with the better seeded teams running through it?
I mean, it's tough because I have seen a lot of people get on the Gaucho train. I think that's how you pronounce their mascot or whatever, from UC Santa Barbara. And Baylor has struggled at times, especially on the defensive end, which is weird for a Scott Drew coach team. They've always been that stout, defend and rebound type team. But I think their guard play for Baylor is just too efficient. They have some of the best offensive weapons in the country, at least at this point. So I think it's just going to be too strong for UC Santa Barbara to take over in an upset. And then looking down at the 2-15 matchup between Arizona and Princeton, some people are saying that that's going to be a little closer than people think. I still think Arizona is too strong. They ended up winning the Pac-12 over UCLA in an instant classic in that title game. I think they're too efficient offensively, led down low by Azuolas Tubelis and Omar Ballo. I think 2 and 3. I think they're going to breeze through it pretty easily. Missouri and Utah State's interesting because I feel like Missouri doesn't have the experience. Dennis Gates in his first year had to pretty much rebuild that team entirely in his first season, like I said. And Utah State's been really strong all year. I personally thought they were going to be an 11 seed, and I think many people did too. But they're still a very strong team that can take over, especially coming from a good Mountain West conference. And for the 6-seeded Creighton versus 11-seeded NC State, I agree with you. I thought NC State should have been in Dayton. I feel like, in the tournament field, you should worry about what you did against the stronger teams rather than the weaker teams. And North Carolina State didn't do all that much. And Creighton was a top 10 team in the country coming into the season and early on before in, November, December, they had a pretty rough stretch. And a lot of that stretch was due to the absence of Ryan Kalkbrenner. And he's a finalist for the Naismith Defensive Player of the Year award. And with him back, it feels like, the offense under Coach McDermott's always going to be really, really strong. But now, if they can get that defensive centerpiece back and healthy, which Kalkbrenner has been ever since that stretch, I think this team has a chance to go pretty far. And I don't think they'll fall a victim to a 6-11 upset.
So for me, looking at the bracket, so I have my own main bracket. Now, a disclaimer, last year, my main bracket turned out to be my worst bracket, but at the start, it looked great. The first day, I went 15 for 16. My only mistake was not predicting the St. Peter's upset. And then that same bracket went 5 for 16 on Friday. So I completely imploded with it. But I have confidence in my bracket this year. In this region, I have Furman making a run to the Sweet 16. They seem like the team that's going to have that sort of magical run this year. But aside from that, I've got it going pretty predictably. I think it's going to be narrowing down to Alabama and Arizona in the Elite Eight. And then out of the South region, I have Alabama. So with the distractions, but Brandon Miller, maybe the best freshman in the country, one of the top players in the country this year. And ever since everything happened, he's still been playing great, and it really hasn't hurt his on-court performance at all. So do you really see anyone contending with Alabama, or in your mind, do you think this is really the Crimson Tide's region to lose?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think Alabama is going to take the region and make the Final Four run. Obviously, with Nate Oates, they're a run and gun team offensively, but then they've also been one of the more stronger defensive teams in the country too. And I think that's just going to be too much to handle. I do think Arizona is going to make it to that Elite Eight matchup, but there's going to be some upsets in between. Like in my mind, I have Creighton taking down Baylor in the round of 32. So they would go on to the Sweet 16. They would fall to Arizona. And then I also have West Virginia taking down Maryland in that 8-9 matchup, which is going to be very intriguing because away from home at the Xfinity Center, Maryland has only beaten Louisville and Minnesota. So we'll see how they do in a different environment. But I still have West Virginia, taking that. I don't think Minnesota is playing in any NCAA tournament anytime soon. So I have it going kind of chalk at least to the end at the end. But there will be some upsets in between.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. In my bracket, I also have Creighton beating Baylor. I think Creighton is an underrated team, and I've got a lot of questions about a lot of the Big East teams that made the tournament, but Creighton is not one of them. I think with their shooting, they could go on a run. Maryland and West Virginia, very intriguing matchup tomorrow as well. You have two coaches in Kevin Willard and Bob Huggins, who historically haven't been the best in the month of March. And those are two teams that were in stacked, loaded conferences that struggled out of the gate, but ended up getting on solid stretches to end the year. So that's going to be an interesting one. But let's move down to the East region. And we're Big Ten guys. A lot of people think Purdue's going to get tripped up early. Now they have what'll probably be the national player of the year in Zach Edey down low. They looked good in the Big Ten tournament. They won the Big Ten championship. One concern we did see, though, was their struggle with the press and seeing leads evaporate. It happened against Rutgers in the second round. And then in the championship, looked like they were running away with it. They were up 17 with 4 minutes left, and Penn State was still able to make it a one-possession game at the end because Purdue really struggled with the press, and Matt Painter, the head coach, just seemed completely befuddled by why this team that's been so dominant this year can't handle a simple press and can let leads go away. And of course, every defense watching that's going to play against Purdue knows that might be their kryptonite. But being realistic in this East region, how far do you think Purdue can and will go?
I think their ceiling is obviously Final Four because they've looked like that for much of the year, especially during Big Ten play when they were number one in the country for a good amount of the season. But at the same time, like you said, we saw some of those cracks with, struggling against the press. Those freshman guards, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, kind of struggled at times. So I think, in my opinion, I think they will fall in the Sweet 16. I say, and I know in our past discussions that you kind of shared the sentiment too, the winner of the Duke Oral Roberts matchup will make either a Sweet 16 or an Elite Eight run. I think Purdue does fall early again. And that's kind of unfortunately been something that Matt Painter struggled a bit with, falling a little earlier than expected year in, year out. And as much as it would be cool to watch, the National Player of the Year, Zach Edey, and one of the best teams in the country make another big run, I think they're going to fall in the Sweet 16.
And I really think for the Big Ten, it's important that Purdue goes on a long run this year, especially since they still won their conference this season. And last year's Big Ten champion was a one and done exit in Iowa in a 5-12 game against Richmond. So it's really important, especially given the trends of the Big Ten kind of struggling. And they did get fewer teams in the tournament than the last 2 years. They had 8 instead of 9, which they had the last 2 seasons. So important for the conference that Purdue or Indiana or somebody goes on a deep run. Now, I'll just go through my quick picks. I have Purdue getting to the Sweet 16. I was swayed by you and Ellis on the Who's on Top podcast to go with Memphis over FAU, but Purdue is going to beat them in the Sweet 16. I'll come back to Duke in a second. I have Kentucky taking care of Providence, though I don't see them going further than that. I think they'll be taken out by Kansas State. My other upset, I have USC going on a Sweet 16 run because there is a tendency where double-digit seeds from the Pac-12 that kind of sneak in as bubble teams can go deep into the tournament. UCLA 2 years ago, Oregon State a few years ago, both of them were on the bubble, got in, were 10, 11 seeds, and ended up making it to the second weekend, deep into the second weekend. And in UCLA's case, all the way to the Final Four. So I look at that as a potential where we could see some surprises in USC against Michigan State, who haven't had a great year and have some question marks on their roster. And Marquette, while they won the Big East, I think USC could maybe surprise them. But Duke, I agree with you. Duke Oral Roberts is a huge game. Oral Roberts may be one of the best mid-majors we see this year. And Duke, under John Shire, just won the ACC, a weak ACC at that, but impressive nonetheless for a first-year coach. And remember, Hubert Davis replaced legendary Roy Williams last year and went all the way to the national championship as an 8th seed. So Duke, maybe they can do that again. They have a young team, but I've got them going on a deep run. So for me, just to take you through it a little more, so I've got Duke upsetting Purdue in the Sweet 16 to get to the Elite Eight. I think it's going to come down to Duke and Kansas State. I've got Duke going to the Final Four out of the East region. So what does your East region look like?
So obviously Purdue's going to take down the 16 seed. I believe that matchup is tonight between Texas Southern and Fairleigh Dickinson, New Jersey's team. And then Memphis FAU. Unfortunately, the great year from FAU comes to a close. I thought they were underseeded. Such a great year in the Sun. Are they in the Sun Belt or Conference USA? I keep mixing up the two.
Conference USA.
That's what I thought. Okay, yeah, great year for them. Unfortunately, they kind of got a short end of the stick here going up against a really, really strong Memphis team who took care of business against Houston in the AAC championship. And Memphis has one of the best scoring guards in Kendrick Davis in the country. Duke, like you said, I think that matchup is going to be huge. Max Abmas is obviously a rock star for Oral Roberts, but I think that defensive improvement under Oral Roberts has been just as impressive. But Duke is playing as well as anyone in the country right now. They've won 9 straight. I think they take care of business, unfortunately, for Oral Roberts. Tennessee, Louisiana. Tennessee has shown a tendency this season to basically have an inability to put the ball in the basket, and losing Zakai Ziegler to a torn ACL is definitely not going to help matters. But I think their defensive floor is good enough to get them over the first round matchup against Louisiana, but they're not going to go far after that. And then Kentucky Providence. I actually have Providence coming out of that with a victory. Ed Cooley just finds ways to win out of nowhere, it feels like. And it's the Bryce Hopkins revenge game after he transferred from Kentucky. So I think they pull the upset there. And it feels like some people are starting to pick Montana State over Kansas State. I don't know if I see it that way. I think Kansas State in that loaded Big 12 has played like one of the best teams in the country. I think they're going to take care of business. I'm going to go with USC as well. Even if Drew Peterson's a little banged up, Boogie Ellis is another star guard that can shine in March. So I think USC as the Tennessee takes care of business there. And then Marquette, I don't know if they're going to lose to USC, but I think they're going to make it really, really difficult on them. Tyler Kolek has played like an absolute stud, All-American player this year, coming out of nowhere pretty much. I think he leads them to a very interesting matchup between them and Kansas State, another team that's pretty much come out of nowhere under first-year head coach Jerome Tang. I think Kansas State takes it behind Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel. And I think they make the Final Four as they beat Duke in the Elite Eight. I'm going with the opposite of your matchup.
All right. So we'll see how that region shakes out. Let's go Midwest. So Houston, a lot's going to hinge on the health of Marcus Sasser, which, to be completely honest, I don't think is as big of a concern as people are making it out to be. Kelvin Sampson says he's going to be a game time decision for the first round matchup, but first round against Northern Kentucky, while they're a good 16 seed, I don't think they necessarily need Marcus Sasser to win that game. They need him down the stretch. So as long as Sasser is healthy, I think Houston's got the potential to go on a run. Really, it's the bottom half of this bracket that gets interesting because I got Houston going to the Sweet 16. Iowa, Auburn could be an interesting game. Both of those teams are incredibly flawed, so I don't know which one's going to come out on top. Auburn collapsed the second half of the season. Iowa is hit or miss. Can they make their 3-pointers? And that can be like a 30-point spread for them on any given night. Not to mention Auburn's got one of the best defenses in the country. Miami Drake is another one of those 5-12 games that a lot of people are looking at a potential upset. I don't see it that way. We've seen the Hurricanes overperform their regular season showing in March Madness multiple times, including last year. I think this year they're going to get to the at least to the second round. Actually have them going to the Sweet 16. My other upset in the top half, I've got Kent State upsetting Indiana. That's a popular pick because the Hoosiers have had some poor performances down the stretch. They did lose to Penn State in the Big Ten championship. They do have Trace Jackson Davis. I mean, not the Big Ten championship, Big Ten semis. They do have Trace Jackson Davis. They do not have Xavier Johnson. Jalen Hood-Schifino's had a great year for them, but Kent State, great year in the MAC. They have a lot of shooters. But then the bottom half, I look at Iowa State. I think they're going to get through. I like Iowa State to get to the Sweet 16. I think Xavier scared me with their performance in the Big East Championship where they were just completely overmatched, it seemed, by Marquette. Texas A&M, again, I feel like the committee doesn't like them. Last year, they had a case to make the tournament and they didn't. This year, second best team in the SEC, make it to the conference championship game. They should be better than a 7th seed, especially when Kentucky's a 6. And then I believe this is the upset we agreed on the other podcast. Texas, with their interim coach, despite winning the Big Ten, we think that the Big 12, the biggest upset we see is 15th seeded Colgate going in there and taking down the Longhorns.
Yeah, I agree with that one. I think Texas is going to fall to Colgate. Matt Langle, basically him and the Temple job is like a perfect connection there. So I think this is his last ride as the coach of Colgate before he moves on to a bigger job. Finally, it feels like this is 2 or 3 years overdue. They are one of the most efficient teams in the country, inside and outside the arc. Weirdly, not from the free throw line, but that's just weird. And yeah, Texas A&M. It feels like they were underseeded. Their non-conference did not go all that well. But since the calendar flipped to 2023, they've been probably one of the best teams in the entire country. But Penn State's also been playing as hot as anyone. And with Jalen Pickett leading the way, Seth Lundy and Andrew Funk playing really, really well from the outside. If their supplementary pieces play well, I think they can pull off quote unquote upset. 7-10 upsets are not usually, world beaters and all that kind of thing. But I think they have the possibility here. They've been playing as well as anyone right now. And I think I'm higher on Xavier than most. They have that potential to be one of, those 3 seeds that can make it far. Jack Nungy's played really, really well ever since he left Iowa. Sean Miller is an experienced coach in March from his time at Arizona. I think they take care of business. Iowa and Pitt, I've been going back and forth on because a lot of times those first 4 teams ride that momentum into taking down the 6th seed. And Iowa State's looked really, really good and really not so good at times this year. So I don't really know which team which team is going to show up. And I also agree with you on the idea of Kent State upsetting Indiana. They've just kind of looked really up and down. And some of their role players have had tough games in which they've lost, like a Race Thompson or a Miller Kopp or a Trey Galloway or someone like that. And Jalen Hood-Schifino, he's a freshman. He's a star freshman. But he could be, having one of those performances like they did against Penn State where he just couldn't hit his shots. So that's a potential upset there. And I am going with the 12-5 Drake over Miami. Drake is a big and experienced team with a great coach. And Miami, like you're right, they have experienced a lot of March Madness success under Jim Larrañaga, but they're also missing one of their forwards, Norchad Omeyer. I don't know his status for this game, but if he's out, I mean, that's a lot of front court depth that Miami is missing. So I think they could fall there, even if their guard plays excellent. And if Omar is healthy, then it could go the other way. But as of right now, if he doesn't play, I see Drake taking down Miami. And yeah, Iowa Auburn's probably going to be one of the most interesting matchups in the entire tournament. Like you said, it's pretty much a 30-point spread for Iowa if they can hit their threes or not. And they are a tenacious offensive rebounding team, but not a whole lot on defense. Auburn, like you said, are Bruce Pearl, one of the better defensive teams in the country, even though they didn't really look all that good on down the stretch. I think Iowa pulls it off because whenever you expect Fran McCaffrey and company to fall, it seems like they always rise up and do whatever you don't expect them to do. And I agree with Houston. I don't think Marcus Sasser is as important for Northern Kentucky. If he plays like 15 or so minutes just to get his legs back under him, they'll be fine. And then they should be fine in the second round too. I think they are better, significantly better than both of the teams in the 8-9 matchup.
I will say though, Iowa, if they can start hitting their shots like they did down the stretch in Big Ten play this year, and in the Big Ten tournament last year, they can beat anyone. Sanford off the bench, tremendous. The McCaffrey kids, they're great too. They have another Murray brother that's there, looks exactly like Keegan, who can shoot the ball pretty well too. And you got Rebraca down low. So they're an interesting team, but being an 8 seed, they're going to be tough against Houston, who knows how to defend the 3 ball and can defend up and down all 5 positions. So for me, in the Midwest, as we've talked about, you're higher on Xavier than me. I have Iowa State reaching the Sweet 16. I think Texas A&M, Colgate's not going to have that St. Peter's type of run. It's going to be just the 1 win, and then they'll be out. I've got A&M all the way to the Elite 8. I'm sorry, a team that wins 17 games in SEC play, and the SEC recently has been arguably the best college basketball conference. I think A&M has earned their right to get all the way to the Elite 8, but they're going to cross hairs with Houston. And I think this is very similar to Alabama up in the South region, that it's really Houston's region to lose. So I've got the Cougars going to the Final Four. How about you?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. Houston, it feels like, I picked a lot of upsets in this region, the 4, the 5, the 2. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. I have Xavier reaching the Elite 8 against Houston, but I think Houston is just too strong and too experienced. I mean, this team made a Final Four 2 years ago. In what was another chaotic region. So I think they'll do it again here. I think they're going to be the last team standing in what is an upset-riddled region. Yeah, that's my pick. I think Xavier's going to give them a tough fight, but I think Houston makes it back to the Final Four again.
And we remember that Houston season very well as Rutgers fans from 2 years ago. Finally, the West region. This is Kansas's region. To me, this is the most stacked region of the 4 in terms of the teams. And there's a lot of interesting stories here. One is the WCC, the West Coast Conference, Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They've gone back and forth the last couple of years. They're both in this region. You also have UCLA, who have dealt with some major injuries, missing one player for the rest of the season, and questions about a second, but it didn't really matter in the Pac-12 championship. They were able to get the best of Arizona and UCLA. Of course, a blue blood knows how to win in the month of March. Looking at it for me, I think Kansas got a bad draw. It's going to be tough in the second round, regardless of who comes out of Illinois, Arkansas, Brad Underwood, Eric Musselman, two tremendous coaches, two teams this year that things didn't necessarily go their way, but Big 12, Big 10, SEC, two great conferences. They had tough competition, and Kansas did just lose the Big 12 championship game by 20 points. But Bill Self will be back on the sideline, and they do have Jalen Wilson and Grady Dick, who have combined for 40 points in each of Kansas's last two wins. The other 5-12 game here, I've seen it kind of split with people. A lot are saying St. Mary's is really talented this year. They're the real deal. They can go on a run. They are capable of that. They played toe-to-toe with Gonzaga. Others are saying VCU, this is feeling like the magic of those Shaka Smart teams back in the day out of the A-10, that they could maybe rally and win a couple of games. And that's what I see. I have a VCU run to the second weekend. I think they can beat St. Mary's. I also think they can beat UConn. I don't think Iona is upsetting UConn. Rick Pitino's mind is set on St. John's at this point, so he's just going to get through that game. And within a month, he's going to be coaching in the Big East all over again, but he's going to lose. VCU is going to make the Sweet 16. Bottom half of the bracket, I think ASU can get to the round of 32. I was going back and forth about this because TCU is a good team, had some statement wins against great programs in Big 12 play, but ASU's guards, they can shoot the ball. They also know how to win late game situations. They had that incredible half court heave to beat rival Arizona a few weeks ago. I see some magic for ASU. I think tonight they're going to beat Nevada. I think Nevada, right there with NC State, are the two most undeserving teams that made it in on the bubble into the NCAA tournament field. And I think ASU is going to win that. And I think they could upset TCU. Now, a lot of people are talking about Gonzaga and Grand Canyon University. Bryce Drew, he knows how to win games in March. And the 3-14 upsets, I don't really feel them. A lot of people have been hyping them up between the Kansas State and Baylor and this. I don't see any of those happening. I think Gonzaga is going to get through the first round easier than some people might think. And then I see you've got Boo on your shirt, Boo Buie and Northwestern facing off with Boise State, who was on the bubble, but it reestablished themselves down the stretch in the season. Mountain West, great conference, got several teams into the tournament, but I think Northwestern's inexperience in the NCAA tournament is going to work against them, and I think Boise State is going to find a way to beat them. Northwestern looked really questionable down the stretch of that Penn State game. Chase Audija offensively has been bad over the last couple of weeks, and if Boise State can lock down Boo Buie, question is, can Nicholson and Barnheiser do enough for Northwestern? I say no. So I've got Boise State moving on. UCLA, despite the injuries, I like them a lot. So down to the Sweet 16, I've got a rematch of the Jalen Suggs game, UCLA and Gonzaga. I think this is where Gonzaga's run ends. I don't think the Zags have nearly as talented of a roster as they've had in previous years, despite returning Drew Timme and others. I think it's going to come down to Kansas and UCLA, and that's when UCLA, the injuries are going to catch up to them. And Kansas with Jalen Wilson, Grady Dick, what else can I say? Jayhawks move on to the Final Four. So for you in the West region, any potential upsets that people making their brackets should keep an eye on? And how for real are UCLA and Gonzaga? Both of them, UCLA with injuries, Gonzaga from the WCC, and have struggled to perform in the month of March before. Where do you see the direction of this region?
Yeah, I think St. Mary's is going to take care of business. I think it's all going to be up to the play of a freshman, Alex Mahaney. I mean, relying on a freshman, he does not look like a freshman. He plays well above his years. But I think VCU, I think we're going to see the VCU that struggled in the first half of that A-10 championship game against Dayton. And St. Mary's is going to put it away. Randy Bennett, one of the best coaches in the country, has been here all the time. They're a terrific defensive team as well. And so on the other side, I've established myself as a certified UConn hater. I am of the belief that Iona is going to pull out that victory, even though it probably won't happen. That matchup up in Albany between Rick Pitino and the Iona Gales versus UConn, Danny Hurley. It's going to be a great matchup to watch. And I think Iona's gonna pull out the shocker. Um, Now in the 6-11, I don't exactly see it. I think TCU is a bit underrated. A lot of their big losses came when Mike Miles was either out with injury or still recovering from that injury, not 100%. I think with Mike Miles and Eddie Lampkin, who has already said he's going to enter the portal, I think they're a great team. But for now, like I said, with Lampkin, I think they're a great team. I don't see the 3-14 upset with Gonzaga and Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is an excellent 3-point shooting team, but Gonzaga still has Drew Timme. Julian Strother has also blossomed into a star under Mark Few. I think they pretty easily make it over Grand Canyon. Now, for Northwestern and Boise State, that's going to be a really interesting matchup. Like you said, Chase Audige has struggled with his shot for a little bit now, and it's all going to come down to Boo Buie. And Brooks Barnheiser has kind of broken out as that third fiddle, that guy that can just kind of make shots when you need him. But I think that comes to an end. I agree with you. I think Boise State comes away with the win there. And UCLA, Jalen Clark is out for the season with that torn Achilles, and he's been one of the best players and defenders in the entire country. And also, the status of Adam Bona is kind of up in the air. He hurt his arm in that Big Ten championship game, or a Pac-12 championship game
Soon the Big
versus
Ten.
Arizona. Soon the Big Ten. You're right about that. But yeah, I'm not too sure how they're going to look without him. Against Arizona, they still looked very good. I mean, they had a Jaime Jaquez playing the center role. And he looked pretty good doing it against what is the physical monster that is Omar Ballo. So I think they're going to be okay. Like you said, it's going to catch up to them eventually. I have them bowing out in the Sweet 16, not to Gonzaga though, to TCU. I think TCU, they're just too talented. I'm very high on the Big 12 this year. Mike Miles has been that guy all year when he's been healthy. I think they're going to make it to the Sweet 16, and I think they're going to beat UCLA without Jalen Clark and a not 100% Adam Bona to set up a rematch. And this is going to be my bold pick of the entire tournament, a rematch against Kansas. And Kansas walked into Allen Fieldhouse and absolutely blew out Kansas by 20. I think they pull off the upset again in the Elite Eight. I think TCU is making a Final Four run under Jamie Dixon. He finally gets that big run under his belts. That's my bold pick of the tournament.
All right, so I guess then we're three teams the same in the Final Four: Alabama, Duke, and Houston, and then we split on the Big 12 teams. Yes, so that means I got Alabama and Duke. You've got and Houston and Kansas. You've also got the Alabama Duke matchup, and then Houston and TCU. Again, credit to the Big 12. They've had a tremendous year. All of their teams have been in the mix. 7 of the 10 made the tournament. The other one was another one was a 1 seed in the NIT, and they add Houston next year, who is one of the top programs in the nation. But looking at the Final Four, Alabama and Duke, I think the inexperience will catch up to Duke here, of both their coach John Shire and the freshmen that are leading the way on the team. And just like last year, Duke will bow out in the Final Four. This time, they're the ones that are in as the underdog. Brandon Miller, if everything that's happened over the last couple of months hasn't hurt his on-court performance, I don't think anything else will. So Alabama makes it to the championship. Houston and Kansas, I really like Houston this year with their defense. And by this point, this is a few weeks from now, Marcus Sasser should be good to go. So barring any setbacks, Houston's going to be 100%. And I think that defense could really hone in on Kansas and shut them down. And then in the championship, it's going to be Alabama and Houston. This will be a low-scoring game. I think the Cougars' defense is going to find a way to stop Brandon Miller. And as John Rothstein would say, Nate Oates, my cousin Vinny, actually no, because he's not going to be the cousin Vinny. His run's going to come to an end in the national championship. Alabama, stick to football. Houston's going to win it. 62-58 is my final score. So how about you? What do you have shaken down in the Final Four?
Yeah, I agree. I think Alabama's just too strong. They also have some inexperience, but not as much as Duke, especially like you said on the coaching front. I think they're just too strong on both sides of the floor. Alabama's going to take down Duke in the Final Four once again and advance to the championship game. Now, the Houston TCU matchup is very interesting. Like you said, Marcus Sasser should be back to 100%, but I don't know. I feel like this is just a miracle run for TCU after, they almost took down Arizona last year. I think they're going to upset Houston again and make it to the national championship game, and was going to be an action-packed affair between Mike Miles and Jamie Dixon, along with Brandon Miller and Nate Oates. I think this game is going to be pretty high scoring as opposed to what you might expect from these two teams. I'm going to put it as 79-73. And I'm gonna say Alabama takes it home. They've just been too strong all year. Absolutely ran through the SEC. They take it home.
But we'll see what happens. Going to be a fun tournament. We wish Rutgers was a part of it, but unfortunately they are not. But March Madness always lives up to the hype, and you never know. There could always be a Cinderella that runs through, but hopefully our predictions can do you some good with your brackets as you continue to fill them out before the action starts on Thursday afternoon. Alec Crouthamel, appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here on Sports Speak.
Of course, happy to be here. Let's hope we get some good basketball over the next 3 weeks.
So that'll be it for this episode. Next week, NFL free agency, and then our MLB season preview. Follow us on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. You can also follow along with our NASCAR weekly pick'em. The points might have to get adjusted after the big penalties issued to Hendrick Motorsports today, so we'll update you on how that's all faring. I'm still going to be in last place because my picks have been bad through the first 4 weeks. But until next time, we'll see you next week. Enjoy the start of March Madness. I'm Eddie Kalegi, signing off of SportsSpeak.